Hey, everybody, welcome to the Michael Steele podcast. Got a good one today. He's a friend and he's a former governor. I'm excited to welcome my fellow Marylander to the podcast, Larry Hogan, the former governor of Maryland. He governed from 2014 to 2023 and has become only the second Republican governor elected in Maryland in the last 50 years. He had a great legacy that he's left behind. We'll talk about that. We'll get into his decision to run or not to run for the presidency. And he had some views about the party and where it's going to go and why he's still in it. So really looking forward to this. I think you will enjoy it. His accomplishments include not just cutting taxes over the last 8 years and doing the things like investing in education and all of that, but also sort of setting a role model for how you govern in difficult times, how you governed when you are in front of a formidable opposition and still get good things done. I think it led to his 70% job approval on the day he left office. We're going to talk about all of that with my friend and former governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, on the Michael Steele podcast right after this. Well. I got the governor in the house. Yes, the one, the only, the most successful governor in the history of the state of Maryland, if not the country, in many, many respects. Governor Hogan, welcome to the Michael Steele podcast.
Michael, I'm so happy to be back with you, and that was quite an intro. I don't know if I can live up to that, but thank you.
No, it's not a question of living up to it. You've already done the work. You've put it in. You have proven the point, and there's a lot that you and I share in our political journeys in terms of our work inside the party and all that. But I wanted to start a little bit more in a personal space with you, because I think in order to understand Larry Hogan Jr. is to also get a snapshot or an appreciation of Larry Hogan Sr. And your mom and your family, your brothers, and everybody who's just kind of helped shape your impressions of leadership, how you would go about executing that. And it really began with that gentleman who was a county executive, member of Congress, who set the bar pretty high, not just for you, but as we would find out in history, the country.
Well, thank you, Michael. Well, first of all, you're one of those people that I learned a lot from, and it was such an honor to work with you in the early Steele administration and through Maryland Republican politics. And I'm very happy to be your friend and appreciate the opportunity to be on with you today. But thanks for starting out by mentioning my dad. I learned an awful lot about public service and politics and integrity from my dad. He first he was a FBI agent, and he taught some courses at the University of Maryland and started a small public relations firm. And then he just decided to run for Congress in a district that was 3-1 Democrat to Republican against an entrenched incumbent. And 1966. And so I was 10 years old when my dad first ran for Congress, unsuccessfully, but he came close, which surprised a lot of people. And then the next day that night he announced he was going to run again. And so in 1968, he was elected to Congress and served 3 terms. And so I learned, campaigning, and, I was stuffing envelopes and putting up signs and working in parades from 10 or 12 years old. And my dad went to Congress, and I was kind of hanging out on Saturdays in the Longworth building and, hanging around the house gym, shooting hoops with people like Jack Kemp and George Bush and folks like that came in with my dad in that same Congress. So, but my dad was on the House Judiciary Committee during the impeachment of Nixon, and it was the moment he's most remembered for. It was sort of the end of his political career, practically, but it was, he took a beating but it's the thing he's most fondly remembered for, and that was he was after seeing, and he was a strong Nixon supporter who campaigned with him. Nixon came into the district and campaigned with us. He thought he was doing a good job, particularly on foreign policy, and but when he saw all the evidence, he was the first Republican to come out for Nixon's impeachment in a very impassioned speech in the House Judiciary Committee that was heard around the world. And he was the first one, the only Republican to vote for all three articles of impeachment. And all these, my dad passed away while I was governor, and I got a chance to eulogize him and talk about that moment in time. But it is, I certainly learned a lot from him, and it was kind of the kind of thing we don't see that often in politics, the courage to put the country first and to put aside your own personal political considerations or your party loyalty.
And I think that's so important, because in this era that we're in, which we're going to get into, what you've just described is, for me, the differentiator. It is the thing that sets others apart. Your dad was in Congress at the time. Dick Cheney and those guys were running the hall. And say what you want about their politics, there was not a question about their integrity. There was not a question about their love for the Constitution and their support for the rule of law and doing the right thing in office.
Yes.
And it is amazing to me today how little people appreciate that. And so it's important, I think, for folks to understand that once upon a time, we used to grow those kinds of individuals into public service, which made your leadership in Maryland stand out for so many different reasons and in so many ways, because you anchored it, and it was anchored by your dad very early on. Despite how you used to run around Prince George's County back in the day.
Hey, you'd have to bring all that up. Michael, come on now. We can both tell stories about back in the day in Prince George's County, but
there was still integrity,
Yeah, well, I really did learn a lot from my dad, and he was a role model, and I looked up to him. But you're right, it wasn't just him. It was a different breed of folks in public service. There were leaders in both parties who, you had respect for, that had respect for the Constitution. I remember watching this as a kid and through high school, that they would passionately debate on the floor and have serious disagreements on policy. They would debate in committee, but then they would go have a beer together.
Yeah.
Or the families would get together. They would go out to dinner together, even if you were on the other side of the aisle. And they found ways to compromise, and they didn't question, someone's integrity or their patriotism because they had a different opinion. And they didn't have this kind of, hateful, angry, toxic politics now where you're just demonizing the other side. And it was a much better time, and more things got done. I mean, we all talk about Ronald Reagan working with Tip O'Neill to get things done. And Bill Clinton worked with Newt Gingrich to get things done. Now nobody works with anybody to get things done. But that's what we did in Maryland as, a Republican governor in the bluest state in the country with a more than 70% majority of progressive Democrats in both houses. We got a lot of things done by not just fighting all the time, but we stood up for the things we believed in, but we also were willing to sit down and listen and find that middle ground where people could come together for and I think we got things done for all the people of the state.
So what happened? What happened along the way? What changed from the time your dad left Congress and today? We both. I try to get people to appreciate, guys like us who grew up in DC was our local news in many respects. You know, it was national news for a lot of folks, but for guys like us, it was local news. My daddy wasn't in Congress, but he drove for them, you know, and so he would come home with the stories, and tell, you know, about the conversations they'd have in the car, and they talk to him and engage him and stuff. And, you know, of course, it's, you know, civil rights and a whole bunch of things going on. And there was just an energy around this idea of service and getting things done. And it really kind of mattered to the folks who walked into those halls.
Absolutely.
What happened?
You know, it's a great question, Michael. It didn't happen overnight, and you can't really point to one thing. I think it's got progressively worse and worse over, you know, many decades. This didn't start with Donald Trump. It didn't start, you know, with the divisiveness during the Obama administration. It's been happening for 30, 40 years, I think.
Right.
It's been getting progressively worse, and it's accelerated. You know, it's like we threw gasoline on the fire to, you know, really inflame the situation. But I think it's a combination of social media and the kind of echo chambers that we have, where people on the loudest, angriest voices seem to get all the attention on cable news, on social media. People, there's echo chambers with people only listening to people that agree with them and not willing to listen or talk to people that don't agree with them. And our system is kind of rewarding the craziest, the loudest, angriest people. And so they're what I call it performative politics. And that there are people that go to Congress not because they believe in public service or because they want to solve some of the serious problems that are facing us, but they go there because they want to be famous, and they're more concerned about you know, how many Twitter followers they have, or you know, what kind of outrageous thing they can say to get attention. And it's not a healthy situation. And really, we're seeing it on both sides of the aisle, where we're nominating and sending people to Congress that are further to the left or further to the right, and who don't have any desire to work together to fix anything. And that's why Washington's broken and nothing's done. And 70% of the people in America are frustrated, and they're concerned about our whole political system. And Congress has like a 17% approval rating, which is, you know, not quite, you know, where it should be.
Before I get into some of the national stuff and your recent decision regarding your future, I want to take the backdrop of what you witnessed and learned from your dad, the evolution of politics in the country, and put a little bit of a light on the work you did in Maryland, because I think it's really instructive that at the height of, and this is an interesting way to look at the height of the Republican devolution, the Republican Party devolution from its popularity, if you will, or an interest that people would have in Republicans in leadership. There were two Republican governors in the country who were rewriting how to govern. You in Maryland and Charlie Baker in Massachusetts, both red governors, if you will, Republican governors, managing blue states, Massachusetts and Maryland. Maryland notoriously progressive, not so much because of the people, and this is where it gets a little bit sticky, but as you noted, a legislature that is way out of whack with the typical Maryland voter in one sense. You had to figure out how to make that work. Now, you had a nice little run up in the Early Steele administration. You were our appointment secretary and did a phenomenal job.
I just followed your lead, Michael.
Oh, dude, please. Look, I would call up Larry and I'd go, Larry, what the hell is going on with these people? But
you know, we have to take them back a little further, Michael, in that, you know, before you became a big shot and the chairman of the party and a lieutenant governor, and we worked together in the administration. I was on the Prince George's County Republican Central Committee, and then when I left there, you came in right behind me and blew all of my accomplishments away by building the party and then becoming state party chair. So, but we go back, way before we became, big shots at the state level.
Yeah, we do. And it's because, look, and I think what that says, and why I think we connect to this the way we do is because we've always been grassroots guys. We started out politics in the grassroots. I started out in a very difficult spot in Washington, D.C.
Well, we were happy to welcome you to Maryland when you finally crossed over.
Thank you. Because there weren't a whole lot of my kind walking around D.C. back in the day.
That's the truth. Well,
but you find a way to translate all of that into how you serve and how you lead. You come into office at a time when the previous administration, the O'Malley administration, had really kind of set the state on fire with tax increases, the environmental issues, and things that just seemingly weren't being taken care of, and people were disillusioned and frustrated. How do you take that anxiety and that frustration? Because we see this played out. People talk about how angry they are today. Oh, I'm so pissed.
Yes.
And the difference is leadership. You walked into that situation and said, okay, I got it. You're pissed. You're pissed about the Bay. You're pissed about taxes. You're pissed about retirees who can't afford to stay here in the state. You're pissed about the educational system. You're pissed about the state of our great city, Baltimore, which I, want to have a part of being a solution for the city.
Yeah.
You laid it out, and then you got to work. Tell us what that part of it, that translation of those experiences growing up, walking into an environment where people are pissed, but then growing their confidence, working with a legislature that is wholly set against you, and getting some things accomplished.
Yeah, well, it was kind of a wild story because, I had never held elective office.
Oh, and by the way, the first month you're on the job, you're diagnosed with cancer.
Well, it was a couple months later.
Months, right.
So, I was so frustrated that we had a monopoly. They'd raised taxes 43 times in a row, and it crushed our economy. We lost 10,000 businesses and 100,000 jobs. And I was just a small business guy who knew a little bit about politics, but didn't necessarily want to hold elective office. But I just got kind of angry enough to step up and try to do something about it. And people thought it was crazy. It's a very difficult state, and they didn't really think we had much of a chance. And we've only got 23% Republican in the state, and everybody was a Democrat in elective office. And but I went out there anyway because I thought it was important. And so I kind of in the campaign brought people together because I didn't want to get 23% of the vote. And so I combined, I started a group called Change Maryland, which had almost as many independents and kind of discerning Democrats in it as Republicans. And that was the basis of my campaign. And I was got elected saying it's not just the typical fight between Republicans and Democrats. This is more important than that. Mm-hmm. This is about the future of our state. And so I had to win nearly all of the Republicans and nearly all of the independents and a big chunk of Democrats, like 30% of the Democrats, in order to be elected governor. And we did that. And then, which shocked the political establishment that didn't really want to share the sandbox. And it was the second time in 50 years since you and Bob Ehrlich in that administration. Mm-hmm. First time, it was not something that happens every day. But I came in and sort of I got elected on this frustration. It was almost like a tax revolt. People were like, enough is enough. I've never voted for a Republican in my life, but this is so crazy. I'm willing to try something by voting for this guy. And then I promised to work together and to take the best ideas, regardless of which side of the aisle they came from. I promised it was not going to be divided government. It was going to be an era of bipartisan cooperation. And so we started out and we, cut taxes in our first session. We eliminated the rain tax, which was the kind of final straw that broke the camel's back.
Yes, I remember that. Yes.
So we got a lot done right away. And then, as you mentioned, well, first of all, 89 days in, we had the riots in Baltimore, worst violence in 47 years, which we handled, and people appreciated the way we came in and kept the people safe and allowed for peaceful protests, but kept buildings from burning down and kept the police firefighters from being attacked and injured. And then a couple months later, 60 days later, I got diagnosed with life-threatening cancer. So it was a very eventful first 5-6 months, and then I kind of governed from the hospital. But I was getting 24-hour day chemotherapy. But I come from the private sector. I originally was in commercial real estate brokerage, so my private sector background came in handy. I was always about, how do we find agreement? How do we get this party and this party to agree? How do we get to yes? How do we find a win-win situation? I wasn't focused on, how do I make the other guys look bad? How do I attack them? How do I beat them? I was like, well, there's this problem or this issue. This is the way they think we should solve it. This is the way I think we should solve it. Is there a middle ground? And it turns out we couldn't find it on every issue, but we got a lot of issues done with that kind of a philosophy. And it turns out it was really popular with voters. It was popular. Republicans liked it, and independents liked it, and Democrats liked it, because what they really want are their elected officials to just get to work and roll up their sleeves and try to fix the problems. That's why they elected them in the first place. They want people telling it like it is and being straight and not playing politics. And so turns out Charlie Baker had to do that in Massachusetts in order to get anything done. I had to do that in Maryland in order to get anything done. And it turns out it's exactly what people wanted. So, in 2018, it was a terrible year for Republicans. We were losing all across the country, losing the Senate, losing the House. We had, we lost governor's seats. We lost state legislative bodies. And, I was the second Republican governor reelected in Maryland in the entire 247-year history of the state. And I ran 45 points ahead of Donald Trump, and won in a landslide against the national president of the NAACP in one of the blackest states in America. So, and got huge support in the African American community. Got huge numbers among Republicans, independents, and Democrats. We won Asians and Hispanics. And I think we did show a roadmap for success for the Republican Party. Like, this is the way Reagan built this 49 state landslide, by having a positive, hopeful message that it was trying to represent everyone. That was just a a throwback to like the old school politics that you and I were talking about a few moments ago.
Yeah.
And we left after 8 years in a really hostile environment with a long list of accomplishments, turning the state around economically, cutting taxes 8 years in a row, going from a $5 billion deficit to a $5 billion surplus. I'm the only Republican governor in America to get a Democratic legislature to cut taxes, and we did it 8 years in a row. Only one to throw out Democratic gerrymandered maps. We came up with solutions on healthcare. We came together on any number, cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay, record funding education, and we left with a 77% approval rating, and every single demographic is up in the 70s, including Black voters, Democrats, self-described progressives, conservatives, Republicans, independents, everyone. And that's really hard to do. And it's not because I'm, this fantastic magician. It's pretty simple. Voters liked it. They like cooperation and competence and common sense. That's what they're lacking and crying out for in America.
So would you say then, more so than policy, that last piece, common sense, getting things done, being practical, that's the legacy that leaders should be striving for? Because the policy accomplishments are important, and they're milestones, and they're things that you can look back to and point to. Yes, Larry Hogan built that bridge, or Larry Hogan, created that program. And one of them that was, really kind of a novel one was in the labor force area, where I think you can, arguably make the case that it is the kind of model that the country should be looking at in terms of making sure that the skill sets marry up, with the job and all of that, all good stuff. But in this environment, and given, how people are generally feeling about their politics, their politicians, the culture, the economy, all these things, what kind of legacy, particularly as you were, getting into year 6, year 7, in your 8 years in office, what kind of legacy was beginning to form in your mind that you wanted to leave behind in Maryland?
Well, I could, we don't have time to go through the whole list of accomplishments, but I was really proud of all the things that we got done. I mean, most importantly, on the economy, which is what I ran for office to say, I'm going to turn the state around. And
right.
We had the biggest economic turnaround in America. We went from 49th out of 50 states to number 6. We did, just on any number of issues you were talking about, what things we did on workforce development, on apprenticeships, on dropping the requirement for, for college diplomas to get a certain number of jobs in the state government, and now other states and private sector businesses are following our lead there. I'm very proud of all the actual accomplishments, particularly with under the circumstances, working with people that we disagreed with politically. But I think the biggest thing was that I think people rewarded, they liked the tone, because they're so fed up with the angry politics, and it was refreshing.
Right.
Well, this guy doesn't seem like
he's not mad at everybody.
He's not yelling at everybody.
It's not yelling at reasonable.
Us. But people say to me they say, you just had common sense, or they say you just seem like a regular guy. You don't sound like a politician. And I think it's something about authenticity, competence, and common sense. It's not who's the flashiest, gives the biggest speech, or makes the most noise. And maybe it's not the sexiest thing. It's like the passionate middle that wants to find compromise.
Right.
It doesn't fire up the left or the right, but it does appeal to most voters who rewarded us overwhelmingly for 8 straight years. And I think there's something to be said for it. And I think it's a throwback to the old school politics that we started out the discussion talking about, that I learned from my dad and leaders like him that were in Congress back in the 70s, when I was a kid in high school.
All right. Well, we're going to continue this conversation with Governor Hogan. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to grow out from Maryland to a little bit more national, because for a while there, you were in the middle of the crosshairs of a conversation about the presidency. We want to get a little bit into that decision, as well as how you're seeing our nation's politics play out, particularly when you look at what you were able to get done in Maryland despite the crazy. We're having a great conversation with Governor Hogan. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the Michael Steele Podcast. Michael Steele in conversation with the honorable former governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan. So Governor Hogan,
with the honorable former lieutenant governor of Maryland.
Yeah, well, the G and the LG. That's how it works, right? So let's broaden the lens a little bit and get into the sort of national politics. As I mentioned before we went to break, you were posturing consideration for a run for the presidency in 2024. And you and I have had conversations about that, among a bunch of other things specifically related to the party over the last couple of years. And I have to admit, I admire the process you went through and the way you did it without making a show of it. Right. A lot of people just like to get out there and do the show, and, more hat than saddle. But you wrote a piece for the New York Times in which you laid out your reasons why you decided not to run. What animated that ultimately and made you conclude that this time was not the time? This race was not the race for the presidency for you?
Well, it was a difficult decision, Michael, as we've talked about. I was really wrestling with it because, on the one hand, I was, as you pointed out, leaving as Charlie Baker and I were the most popular, highest approval rated governors in America. People did appreciate the fact that we were able to broaden the tent and get. I think I would have been a great general election candidate. I think we've done it as well or better than anyone in the country in any office about expanding the vote and getting people to cross over, which is what the party's been failing to do for so long. We've lost 7 out of the last 8 presidential, votes and the popular vote, and we've had a really terrible time of it. So my heart was in the race because I was really concerned about what was happening to the country and what was happening to our party, and I thought I had, something to add to the discussion and something to offer. My head was telling me that it was the path to success was narrow, and that there was still a huge portion of the base that was in the Donald Trump camp, and Trump and DeSantis were getting all the attention and oxygen. I thought there was a lane of about maybe a third of the Republican primary vote that wanted to go in a completely different direction, but that there were, maybe 6 or 8 people who were sounding an awful lot like me and saying similar things, who were all kind of either in that lane or merging into that lane. And I didn't want to see a repeat of 2016, where because the vote was split so much, that, we ended up with Trump as the nominee. And so part of it was that selfless, like I didn't need to be a candidate. I didn't need to have another elective office. I really care about, getting our party back and getting the country back on track. And I didn't want to be, I wanted to contribute to it, not to be I wanted to be part of the solution rather than a problem. But I also, it was personal, I had just been through 8 years of really, leaving it all in the field and working my butt off to be successful in our state. And I thought about, is this something, that I want to put my family through for the next year and a half? So it was a hard decision. It was my heart said yes, my head said no, and then my gut kept flipping back and forth for weeks. I'm normally very
the gut is always
what I was
the one
wrestling with.
The gut is the always like, you wake up your mind, please.
Hey, right, exactly. Now, it turns out I was probably just hungry,
right? That's generally the way it works out. But it's interesting though, because you look at the field as it stands. Nikki Haley's in, Donald Trump's in, DeSantis is doing a little bit of Hamlet, but the reality of it is he's likely in. Then you've got the others who are kind of coming up the rear: Mike Pence, Chris Christie, Tim Scott, etc. It lends itself to the reality that, and this has always been my problem with this process. Unless you're really ready to take on the king, right? You're prepared to go into that room and with him and be the only one to walk out, right? That basically what we're talking about, right? The ultimate political smackdown. Don't do it.
Right.
And I'm watching Nikki Haley, dance around this and that, and DeSantis, nice little line about prostitutes, porn stars and payments, but you didn't mention the man's name. You can't even say the man's name. What is it about the hold that Trump has on our GOP? Because for the record, you and I have not left the party.
Right.
And I stay in because it pisses them off, right? And I'm good at doing that. That's what I do. I hold the mirror up and say, I don't see Reagan, do you? I don't see Lincoln, do you? And that's important. Guys like you are critically important to stay in, because we need folks who will then build from the ashes of all of this destruction. But how do you see that grip right now that polling out today, the president's lead in the primary has widened. He's 41% of Republican primary voters are prepared to give him the nomination.
Yeah.
DeSantis has dropped from 33 to 27%.
Yeah.
Enlighten us from your perspective. What the hell's going on here?
Well, I wish I could enlighten you on what the hell's going on, Michael. I'm as concerned and frustrated as you are. But, I've been out there pretty directly saying exactly what I think since the first time Trump came down the escalator. And that didn't always make me, the most popular guy with some of the Trump base. But I was telling the truth. And a lot of people were afraid to say what they really thought, and especially as he gained more power. And some people were just, buying the argument. They supported his policies. But some people kind of knew some of the things were wrong, but they wouldn't say it. And, it was frustrating to me. They would say to me, "Hey, I'm glad you're saying the things you're saying, but I'm not saying it."
Right.
But I think we're starting to see some people start to gain a little courage where there was nobody speaking out, or very few of us. And now a lot of them are moving in that direction. All the names you just mentioned have at least said something that, talks about moving on, including, Vice President Pence just a week or so ago, came out much stronger about holding Trump accountable for his actions on January 6th, and that he wouldn't be supporting him and if he was the nominee, and that we need to move away from him. That's pretty strong for Mike Pence. You met some of the names you mentioned, Chris Christie and Nikki Haley, and a lot of those folks that were pretty close to Trump are now finding their voice, and they're coming out. So I've said for a while that he's eventually going to diminish that, and I'm talking going back years. I spoke in November of 20, right after the election, at the Reagan Institute, and I said, it's another time for choosing for the Republican Party about what direction we take. And I basically laid out the whole case. I said it's going to take a while, but it's a battle for the heart and soul of the Republican Party. And we're still in the battle. We're not winning the battle, but I think we've made some progress here and there. This was a recent slip where Trump went back up. But for a while, he was at, in November of 20, he was at 90% of Republican voters. Right. And then after January 6th, somewhere in there, he was down to 60%.
Right.
He recently dropped into the 30s. Well, it's still a huge chunk. It's still 30% of the primary electorate could be enough to win. But it means that 2/3 of the people were potentially at least willing to consider an alternative, which is, I think, progress. But it's not happening fast enough. And I guess the question is, what's going to happen over the next year? I mean, you know this very well.
Right.
About a year out, we'd have no idea. Polls don't mean anything.
The polls don't mean nothing. Right.
In a year out from 2016, Jeb Bush was going to be the next president. Donald Trump was below 1%. Every race I can think of, it was Scott Walker was going to be the president, and Tim Pawlenty was going to be the president, and Rick Perry was going to be the president. Well, none of those early frontrunners panned out. So we're now saying it's Trump or DeSantis, but a year from now, when the first primary starts, that could not be the case. Both of them could fail. And to your point earlier about all the people trying to decide the next tier of Pence and Haley and Scott and all the somebody has to emerge from that group,
right?
And you have to have Trump somehow continue to fail and diminish, which is not a given, but it's possible. And then DeSantis would have to fail, and I mean that's also a possibility. He's not proven on the national stage, and he's had some slip-ups already. And as you pointed out, he's already dropped in some polling pretty drastically, just with a couple of punches thrown by Donald Trump.
They weren't even real punches. That's the thing that's killing me. I'm reading these headlines, the brawl between DeSantis and Trump. I'm like, the brawl? What brawl? Oh,
I've seen much better brawls than that in politics.
Thank you. I remember a few parking lots in Prince George's County where the brawls were better than that stuff.
Yeah.
But that's the crux of it, though, is to what you've just said, my analysis sort of takes me to this place. It is Donald Trump's until someone takes it from him.
Well,
And,
I think that's probably
no
true.
one, no one is prepared to take it from him, not including DeSantis.
Yeah, I
just don't see it.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Michael. And I think it'll have to change, but right now I don't see it either. And I think they're all walking this fine line, which I wasn't willing to walk, which is they sort of want to gently, start to say some things about Trump, but they still want to hold on to all the Trump base. And so we don't want to say anything that might alienate. And I think somebody's got to come and tell it like it is. And somebody has to punch him in the face.
Well,
and somebody
I don't want that white nationalist.
Somebody has to take them on directly.
Right.
And I could see, a guy like Chris Christie in a debate punching him in the face. I mean, I remember when he took, Marco Rubio out of a debate, but he's been speaking out pretty strongly.
Priceless moment.
Mike Pence is now speaking up, but DeSantis, maybe will start coming out. He's going to have to if he keeps slipping and Trump keeps gaining, and maybe when he gets in the race, he'll start to take the gloves off. But I don't think you can kind of dance around it. Otherwise, if you don't take them on directly, I think it's a good likelihood it could be Trump as the nominee, which I think is bad for Donald Trump and bad for the party and bad for the country. Absolutely. And I think he's the least likely one to win a general election. He's not our strongest. He might be the most likely to win a primary. He's the least likely to be elected president.
That is absolutely right. There's talk in various circles. I do work with a lot of different groups in Washington, tangentially from time to time with voting organizations and political organizations, and the growth of the sort of independent space. Which is not, it's not just centrist. A lot of people say, oh, it's all this. It's not. It's right. Mixed with conservatives. It's mixed with liberals. It's mixed with traditional Democrats, traditional Republicans that are looking for something else. Certainly, you've got the Forward Party, which is trying to do its thing. You got Nancy and her group, No Labels, which is looking to play in presidential politics in 24, which people are very nervous about. Just creating a third lane that siphons off votes. So you have all of these mixed emotions out here about how we bake the cake in 24. What role do you want to play in putting in the ingredients and shaping that cake for 24?
That's a great question. Look, I want to be a part of the discussion, and I want to be a voice on getting us back on track. My focus is going to be on trying to elect the strongest possible Republican nominee, because I really want to fix the Republican Party and have us back to a competitive, two-party system. I think that's important for the country, and so I think the focus, we can talk about that, and as I say, but the initial focus is trying to make sure Trump's not the nominee. And if Trump's not the nominee, I don't think any of that stuff is going to, materialize. But there's no question that you're right. It's not centrist or, squishy middle. It's like there are about, I think some polls would show 16% who self-identify as very progressive, and about the same number as very conservative.
Yep.
So it leaves nearly 70% who are somewhere in the middle. And many of them self-describe as moderates or right of center or left of center. And that's a huge chunk of people.
A lot of people.
If both sides are what they see as kind of unacceptable and the nominating process isn't good, it does open up more of a lane than I think we've ever seen. And I think in every state in the country, the largest growing voter block are independents, and not just new people registering to vote are becoming independent, but people are switching from both parties. And I hear from these people. I talk to, you said you and I are still in the party, fighting to, get things back to the way, more traditional, bigger tent party. But some people are giving up. So there are Republicans who are leaving the party because they're not MAGA, but there are Democrats leaving the Democratic Party saying these guys are just too far left.
Right.
And so it's a big chunk of people that I call them the frustrated majority. There really is a huge portion of America that they don't know what to do, but they know that when we get to a general election, they usually throw their hands up and say, these are the best two choices we could find in America. And so if ever there was a time, it's almost impossible, it's never really happened before, but I think if ever there was a time, I think we're closer to it than ever, where some type of a new way of going about it. And maybe, if they reject, look, 65% of the people in America do not want Joe Biden or Donald Trump to be president. 65, 70%. That opens up a pretty big lane if those two are the nominees.
But one of those will be on the ballot regardless, and that'll likely be Joe Biden. Donald Trump, I think I still give him the odds favorite of well over 50% to be on that ballot, despite his political and certainly despite his current legal woes with pending, charges coming in the New York Stormy Daniels case, the Georgia prosecutors. Then, of course, the federal prosecutor, the special prosecutor who's looking into the January 6th stuff. How does that play in your mind on the Republican side? Does it widen the lane a little bit more? Because right now, the way I would describe the lane, that you've got Trump that owns the lane. Everybody else is pretty much riding on the shoulder, right? They're trying to merge into the lane, right? If Trump is successful the way Trump has been, he can even crowd out the shoulder, right? And that's when people just start falling off.
Yeah.
Do you see other events like potential indictments, et cetera, having the effect of sort of creating a little bit more lane for those potential candidates to run their race?
Well, that's a really good question. I think it's important for us to differentiate. There are Trump got 74 million votes, so there are a lot of Republicans who
he got 7
Trump's
million
policies
more than he got the last time.
Yeah, but I mean, they a lot of people they supported Trump in 2 elections, and they liked his policies, and they much rather have Donald Trump than Joe Biden. Well, those are not the same ones we're talking about that are the hardcore MAGA crowd. That's only about, maybe 1/3 of those people, or 40% of those people who will vote for him no matter what. And I think he's, effectively, in spite of all of his, problems, he's playing it to his base really well. He's going up. People are coming to his defense. It's like, everybody's picking on him with trumped up charges, and it's the media, and it's so among his base, I think he's getting stronger, but I agree it's potentially turning off the rest of those softer Trump votes that go, I voted for the guy, and I like the tax cuts, and I like standing up to China, but I'm tired of this drama. And I don't think maybe we shouldn't have him as the nominee. Maybe he shouldn't be president again. I'm just tired of all this nonsense. And that's, those are the folks that somebody has to appeal to and somehow capture. And it has to be one person, not 8 people.
Not 8 people, right? Well, and on the Democratic side, there's the similar pressure. And I just say to all the Democrats I work with, I'm like, okay, tell me who's going to take on an incumbent president. Tell me who's going to be able to walk into that room and think they're going to walk out of it by themselves, right? They're going to be the ones that come out of it. You wrote about the president after the State of the Union that everyone had flowery applause for and was very excited about. You wrote, quote, President Biden campaigned on uniting our country, but America is more divided and fed up than ever. In November, the American people voted for change because they want to stop reckless spending, increase our domestic energy production, get tough on violent crime, and address the crisis at the border. More rhetoric won't fix any of these urgent challenges or get our country back on track. To fulfill this campaign promise, I urge President Biden to work with Congress to find common sense solutions to these urgent challenges, end quote. So
that's a pretty good quote, Michael. I had forgotten that one.
Yes, it's a really good quote. So was that written with the mind of running for president? And two, how does the president work with the Congress that doesn't want to work with him?
Yeah, well, the first part, no, it wasn't written in the mind of running for president. I just felt very strongly about it because, I remember watching when President Biden was elected and watching when I was at his inauguration. I saw his speech on election night, and I remember him campaigning, although he didn't campaign much it was during COVID from the basement, but he said he was going to unite the country. He said he was going to be the president for all Americans, and he was going to bring people together, which a lot of people wanted us to be brought together. That sounded good, even to a diehard Republican like myself. I was like, well, that
but not to MAGA Republicans,
not to
that 30 or 40% of Americans who are like,
they didn't want to do it. Yeah,
let's go, Brandon. Right? I mean, that
I'm not defending those guys, but I think Biden should have, and I was saying I wished he had done a better job of living up to that promise, which is what I did in Maryland. Was actually I said this is what I'm going to do, and that's what I did, and people were on both sides were happy. I think Biden said he was going to be this unifier, but in some of his rhetoric, it was kind of bashing Republicans and taking shots, and it didn't sound very unifying to me. I mean, I know the Democrats all loved it, and standing ovations, but and not to take any responsibility away from the MAGA people yelling at them in Congress is despicable, but I think he just could have done more to try. I know it's a two-way street, but he's the leader of the free world, and I think he needs to do a better job of trying to reach across the aisle, get things done. It was kind of like he was sort of chastising. He was lumping all Republicans into the same boat with kind of the most extreme ones, and I think it turned off voters in the middle.
So how does he work with his Congress then when McCarthy is basically given the speakership to Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Yeah, well, it's really, really difficult. I mean, on things like the national debt, and we've got Biden and McCarthy both saying my way or the highway. And I mean, we have this looming, problem coming not too far down the road.
It could be a hot summer, not just because of the weather.
Exactly. And it's back to the earlier discussion about people just trying to score points against the other side and have to win, have to beat the other guys. It's all political. It's performative. It's I can't see, this would not have happened if we were going back in a time machine and it's Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill. They would sit down in a room together, and actually negotiate and
have a little Irish whiskey and get it done.
Yeah.
And get it done. Governor Hogan, I know you're a busy man and got things to do, and I appreciate you taking time. Before I let you go, one last thing for you is aside from the politics and all that, what do you hope to do next? What do you see as you begin this next chapter of your life? There are a lot of opportunities in front of you. Not just in politics. I know you're back in your business in real estate, which, by the way, folks, the governor sold me my house, but that's another conversation from back in the day, many years ago. But what do you see next for you and Yumi, former First Lady of Maryland, as you guys sort of look at the landscape in front of you?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me, Michael. I love catching up with you, and it's good to do it right in front of everybody else watching.
Yeah, no, right?
Podcast. It's just like us hanging out, talking. But I don't really know the answer to the question. I just finished being governor about 60 days ago. It's been incredibly busy, and I was just about 2 weeks ago or so. Yeah. I wound up this decision-making process about whether I was going to run for president or not, and now I'm sort of, it's like drinking from a fire hose with lots of opportunities to stay involved and engaged in issues I care about and the politics that I still, want to make sure I'm a part of to get us in. But, and business, I'm going to, Yumi and I are going to take some time. I'm hopefully going to get to see my grandkids and my kids a little more, maybe catch our breath. And I think just clear the head, decompress a little bit, and then make some decisions. But I can tell you, I'm not planning on sitting on the porch in a rocking chair. I'm gonna keep being apart. I'm gonna keep working hard.
There's nothing about a rocking chair or a front porch with this guy. Let me tell you, folks, that's just not how it works. Governor Larry Hogan, I appreciate you, man. You have been a good and dear friend for a long time, and I've always welcomed your counsel as I've hoped you'd welcome mine, and we've been through some fun and some grunts together.
And I think we're probably going to go through some more together too.
I think we are. I think we are. We're not done yet. The boys from PG. Hogan and Steele. I love it.
I like it. That's a good ticket. All right, Michael. Thank you so much,
brother. Take care of yourself. All right, folks. That does it for this time together. We thank you so much for coming in and sharing a moment with Governor Hogan. Appreciate you when you do that download thing on Spotify and Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. You can check out the governor on Twitter at @GovLarryHogan. Until next time, take care of yourselves out there. Be well. Spring is here, baby. Let's get ready. Let's get ready. I'm working on my bloom. I'm working. I don't know about you, Governor, but I'm working to get a little bloom.
I'm ready. Let's go. Pool party.
All right, guys. See ya.